Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We have on the line Lester Jackson, Dr. Jackson, Ph.D., political scientist, had written a number of articles that we carried at Restoring Liberty. He's always on the edge, but in my opinion, hitting it on the mark very frequently. Mr. Jackson, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mr. Jackson, can I call you Lester? Or maybe I should call you Dr. Jackson.
Whatever you want. Dr. Jackson. Nice thing. Call me Lester, okay?
All right. So, Lester, we put up two articles. One, Proof the American Democracy is Dead, the Oligarchs Rule. Thought it was a fantastic article, basically pointing out, using Boehner as a case study, about how the majority opinion seems to be getting subverted by those that we get elected to office. And then you go through an important article, The Faithless Elected Boehner and the House Dons, kind of teeing off of that subject again. My history, Lester. Ran for office a couple of times, saw the establishment fight against me. But one of the things that has benefited me from that political experience is just how closely I now pay attention to a number of the different political races across the country. And one of the things that really marked my basically thought process on American politics this last 2014 cycle was how the Republican Party as a whole adopted this almost Tea Party agenda in their rhetoric. And yet they get to Washington, D.C. after getting elected, wave election, and what do? They sit on their hands. Do we have a problem in the American politic?
I think the central problem, and I put this in the latest article that you posted today, is lying. Just consider this. If you put a bad label on your product, let's say a stepladder, you could get sent to jail. Congress, and I cite several links in my articles, Congress, there's no penalty for Congress people to lie to voters. And they lie with regularity. Now, I think it's important to ask why they lie. They lie because America is basically a conservative country. And the political establishment is far to the left. Not as far to the left as Barack Obama, but far enough to the left. And I think, and I put in my article, that it is an absolute mistake to worry about particular issues because they'll divide everyone who is involved from issue to issue. But what has to be done, first of all, liars have to be defeated by any means necessary. And that means, first of all, you've got to get rid of the current House Republican leadership. By the way, one reason the United States is heading toward tyranny, if it isn't already there, is that democracy presupposes an opposition party. There is no opposition party today. John Boehner ratifies everything Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama do.
Right, and, it started before that, of course. I mean, I've been, even though this is unpopular politically, I've been a strong critic of the Bush administration, even though he looks like an angel compared to Barack Obama, because he actually introduced the spending. He introduced the surveillance state. He did all this stuff that the Democrats are still doing today, and it's pretty transparent when you look at what Republicans have done when they're in power compared to Democrats, that it is a duopoly. They are moving the country in the same direction. Maybe not as fast, but they are.
Can I give you some ancient history?
Sure, you bet.
Really ancient history?
So I guess that predates.
The New Deal.
Okay.
And I don't have time to go into history books, but the New Deal started with Herbert Hoover, who got blamed for the Depression. It was the Democrats' issue for generations. But the initial policies followed by Franklin Roosevelt were started under Herbert Hoover. The last authentically, genuinely conservative president was Calvin Coolidge. and I would recommend strongly the work of Amity Shlaes on Coolidge. Now, I hate to say this because the conservatives, Ronald Reagan is a hero.
I was going to ask about that.
However, to me, he was a big disappointment. What did he do? He campaigned against affirmative action, and he campaigned against quotas. The first thing he did was to appoint Sandra Day O'Connor, who's one of the worst justices we ever had.
But you know why he did that. I mean, Ken Starr wrote the memo on her and promised that she was a conservative. Of course, Ken Starr just stabbed conservatives in the back with that. I think he knew all along what he was doing. But that was really, I mean, the blame for that.
Viguerie testified against her. She was an unknown. Robert Bork could have been confirmed easily because the left had not gotten its character assassination machine up and running by then. And and by the way, Reagan promised to sign, affirmative action was originally put in by an executive order. Oh, incidentally, can I tell you a little secret?
Sure.
Affirmative action was really started by Nixon. There was a plan he put in when he came to office in 1969 called the Philadelphia Plan, which was opposed by Democrats and labor unions. And it was Nixon who gave us the EPA. It was Nixon who gave us a whole host of things. He also appointed. Do you know that Roe versus Wade was decided by 7-2, and among those 7 were 6 Republicans, I believe?
Right. So your position is, even though, we're seeing this, what a lot of people regard as something that's new under the sun, it's not. It's actually been in play for decades, if not the past century, where both parties represent the same
And not
interests.
having a representative democracy, just remember one thing. The United States Supreme Court and the federal judiciary in general is the last refuge of democracy's losers. Those who cannot get their way, which means the left, through democratic means, they cannot persuade their fellow citizens of the correctness of their policy. They run to the Supreme Court, and they get one decision after another. And of course, there was a justice named James McReynolds in the 1930s who was ridiculed by my constitutional law professors when I was in college. And what did I know then? I didn't know anything. But I've come to realize the man was correct. He wasn't a very likable man, but he was correct. He got up and read a dissent from the bench, which judges do when they feel very strong, and he was ridiculed for saying the Constitution is gone.
Wow.
And of course, when you have judges who make words mean anything they want them to mean, then words mean nothing.
It's the tyranny of the black robe. They're the final arbiter.
Suppose you wrote a will and you said, well, I'm leaving my money to X, Y, and Z, and the judges say, nah, he really meant it to leave it to A, B, and C.
Well, and that's basically what's happening. There was one of the things that has really brought this into high relief is the imposition of the judiciary's view on homosexual marriage in complete opposition to the majority of states in this country. And there, it hasn't been running to the Supreme Court, although they're going there. It's
Not
been
to
running to
mention
the
the
district
Congress
courts.
passed something called the Defense of Marriage Act.
Right, exactly. And it's the imposition of the minority on the majority. I mean, when this whole scheme started, the vast majority of the country was against homosexual marriage. There's been a radical change because the country now looks to the law for morality rather than other sources. And they define the law as the judiciary.
One of the things they pointed out in the gay marriage cases was that the majority is changing. Well, I got a question for them. California has an initiative and referendum. If the majority changed, why don't the people of California just vote to change the law?
Right. Why do you have the courts that do it?
I mean, where is this majority? In a few polls of a handful of selected people?
Right.
These polls are frequently wrong, and they're deliberately skewed with stacked deck questions.
And Lester, we have about a half a minute left, so we're going to wrap up the segment. But in the next segment, I want you to talk a little bit about, you made this, I'll call it controversial statement, liars must be defeated by any means possible. I'm going to want you to flesh that out. Plus, I want you to name names. Who are these liars?
To it.
All right, so we'll be back with you here in just a few minutes. Stay with us as Lester Jackson breaks it down for us. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have Dr. Lester Jackson online, PhD, political science writer. We put up a number of his articles at Restoring Liberty, controversial. We promised you that. He wrote an article, The Faithless Elected, Boehner and the House Dons. So, Lester, tell us who the House Dons are.
The House Dons are John Boehner, Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, Majority Leader, who took over from Eric Cantor, who was thrown out, thankfully, by the voters in Virginia. Steve Scalise, the Majority Whip, and Pete Sessions, Chairman of the House Rules Committee. These people, if the Republicans in the House of Representatives refuse to remove these people, and the reason I call them Dons is because they rule with an iron fist. They discipline very severely anybody who disagrees with them and dares to buck them. They strip them of chairmanships. They send them to the equivalent of House Siberia. And on top of that, they are absolute liars. And they proceed, and they are hypocrites. And let me give you an example. This Cromnibus bill. It's very important for people to understand. You see, people don't understand the legislative process, and why should they? They've got their lives to live. But there are rules of procedure, and those rules of procedure often influence what the House does. And the people who make the rules are the House leadership. The Rules Committee, there is a Rules Committee in the House which basically decides if, when, and how a bill is going to be debated and voted upon. Now, what they do is they will vote one way on the rule and another way on the actual bill. They will vote liberal on the rule that governs the bill, that determines how the bill turns out, and then they will vote against the bill and say, see, I voted against it.
And fortunately, people are getting smart about that. We've had at least one political figure in the state do that continuously, Senator Lisa Murkowski, the old saying, I was for it before I was against it, where the really important vote, of course, is the procedural one, because it allows it to come to a vote.
She's still there.
She is still there, yeah.
And she got there in part by lying about what she is. And that's why liars have to be defeated. Now, you can't defeat them all. But I have come to the conclusion that if Republicans are going to enable the worst abuses of power of Democrats, then they are no different than Democrats. And they are more dangerous than Democrats. Because, if you're in a lawsuit, you expect the other guy's lawyer to fight against you. But you don't expect your own lawyer to fight against you, do you?
Nope, been there, done that.
Now, for goodness sakes, the Republican Party does everything. I have to mention this, if you could just bear with me. Go
ahead, as long as it's not too extreme.
There was a hearing on February 15th, 2011. I will be glad to provide that link to anybody who wants it. If you want, you can post it on your site. I don't know. But it is one of the most painful things I ever watched. I stumbled on it by accident on C-SPAN. It's no longer there, but it is on YouTube. And Steve King, one of the real giants of the House of Representatives, said, look, let's defund Obamacare. Cut out the funds, and that's it. You will have no more Obamacare. We'll kill it right in the bud, right in the infancy. So you had 8 Republicans on the Rules Committee, led by this woman from North Carolina named Virginia Fox, who calls Obamacare an abomination. And she says, I voted to repeal it. But they're not going to give Steve King a waiver to allow the House to vote on his amendment to defund Obamacare. And
it's being stopped at the committee.
Say that again? She's
stopping it at that committee. Is that correct?
She voted against it. All the Republicans, from the chairman, then David Dreyer. And by the way, I'm sorry to say this. I know a lot of conservatives are in love with Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, but he was just a new guy on the Rules Committee there. And to hear him unctuously lecturing Steve King on what the House could not do. Now, this is very important, very important.
Now, Tim Scott being in the Senate now lectured Steve King.
Well, he's in the Senate, but he did not stand very tall to me. That's probably why he's in the Senate. And if you have the time, I'll get to Ted Cruz in a minute and why they hate him. But but the main ringleader of this was Virginia Fox, who turns my stomach. And you watch this hearing, and you knew that the 2010 election was over before it started because they weren't going to do anything significant. And Virginia Fox says to Steve King, what are you going to do about the Senate? The Senate's never going to accept this. And Steve King says to Virginia Fox, there is not a dime that can be spent by the federal government unless the House concurs. Let me explain for the benefit of your listeners exactly how immense the power of the purse is. It's an absolute power, and a majority of either house can exercise it. That's all it takes. And compare this to the president's power of the veto. The president's power of the veto could be overturned by 2/3 of the House and Senate. But 50.1% of the House of Representatives, 218 representatives, can tell everybody else to go fly a kite and to get lost. We're not going to give you the money.
Of course, they're scared politically because of government shutdown, but now, because I guess essential services remain funded, they could do the shutdown and not have the same sort of what they perceived as the political baggage associated with it.
Look, this is one of the biggest lies, and you even got conservatives like Charles Krauthammer accepting this. The government was, first of all, most of the government was never shut down at all.
Right.
You know that. Anybody who follows these things knows that. Second
course.
of all, it takes 2 to tango. They can say, we're giving you all the money you want except for this. If you don't like it, you're shutting it down. Don't any of these Republicans have the guts to tell the truth? And now let me bring you to Ted Cruz. One of the greatest speeches I ever saw on the United States Senate floor. Again, I stumbled on it by accident. And this was December 11th, 2014. I can provide a copy of the speech to anybody who wants it. He did 2 things. He said, why are we in this lame duck? Why are we nullifying the results of an election before the new Congress took office? And he said, you know why? people are getting paid off by the K Street lobbyists. He's virtually saying that his fellow senators are corrupt.
Right.
He's telling the truth about them. And number two, he says, I have a point of order that the amnesty is unconstitutional. And a point of order is something that's non-debatable. So they have to vote on it right away. He forced these people to go on record, and they want to be able to deny that they support amnesty. And I think something like 22 Republicans voted for his point of order, 20 Republicans voted against it, and including some people like Mike Enzi and Kelly Ayotte, and people who hold themselves out to be conservatives, and they want to be able to lie about their positions, and he forced them to go on record. And that is why, to tell you the truth, I support Ted Cruz for president, because he tells the truth.
Yeah, he tells it like it is, and he's hated because of it, despised because of it. We don't have a lot of time left, but I want you to comment on, again, going back to that comment that you believe that liars should be defeated by any means possible.
By
and
any
that
means
Republicans,
possible means...
What does that mean?
It means first run conservatives against them in the primary, and if necessary, do what William F. Buckley, Jr., nobody can accuse him of not being a conservative. He said, this guy, Lowell Weicker, is so bad, I'm going to support the Democratic opponent, Joe Lieberman.
Wow.
If it takes voting for a Democrat to get rid of these people, then do it, because no junior Democrat who gets elected from John Boehner's district can do anywhere near the damage and the harm to conservative values that John Boehner has done and will continue to do and lie about it.
Are you a proponent of third parties getting involved in general elections to effectuate that?
Well, first of all, the Republican Party started out as a third party. Second of all, we don't even have a second party today. Because
touche, I get that. So, in common parlance.
Well, it's a bit difficult to answer in the time you have left. But what I believe is either the current Republicans have to be thrown out, or enough of them have to be thrown out to put the fear of God in them, or there has to be a third party. Because, first of all, there's a difference between a third party and a minor party. I mean, we're not talking about some fringe party. You have to. It's been done, contrary to what belief. There used to be the two parties in England. Used to be the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party was replaced by the Labour Party.
That's how they all start. I got to tell you, there are people that are very disgruntled and concerned about how they're being, or the lack of representation they have from both parties. I mean, you see the political discontent on both sides of the aisle, and it's because you're right. I mean, both parties are tending to do the same thing. Lester, I appreciate you being with us. We got a break coming up here, but really enjoy. Don't agree with all your insights. You and I have disagreement on Reagan, but the fact of it is that much of what you said, I'm right in alignment with you on, and appreciate your contributions to restoring liberty, and look forward to hearing you again on the show sometime in the future. Thank you.
Anytime. It's a pleasure to be on.